So, am I audible? I am audible. Not intelligible, perhaps, but audible. This is one of those presentations where you ought to have a faculty member talking about substantive stuff and a technology guy talking about the infrastructure that supports the substantive stuff. But I remember Peter Martin years ago doing something that I just have to reproduce in place of that, and that is, good morning, I'm Patrick Wiseman, I'm a professor of law at the Georgia State University College of Law. Good morning, I'm Patrick Wiseman, his technical support guy. This isn't to say that our technical support at Georgia State is not wonderful. It is, but I've been developing this stuff over years where we were all sort of struggling with it at the same time. And in fact, the guy that I most intimately developed all this stuff with over the years has very recently left us for greener pastures. So I really am my own technical support guy. What I'm going to talk to you today about is the extent to which evolution is transformative, because I'm going to talk a little bit about what my syllabuses used to look like, what they look like now. As much as possible, the technical support guy isn't going to be here. The professor guy is going to try to explain to the extent that there's anything. In other words, I'm not going to try to get under the hood too much. I'm just going to describe to you how my syllabi have evolved over the years. I'm going to show you an old one, one of the early online syllabi, if you like, the first to emerge from the ocean in the evolutionary. And then there'll be a bunch of missing links, and I'll talk about a couple of recent syllabi. Then I'm going to take a slight detour to tell you a little bit about my course on law on the internet, which is happening even as we speak this summer. And when I say it's happening even as we speak, I mean that quite literally. It's going on right now because the students are doing it, and I just create the environment in which it happens. But it's informative about some of the respects in which the syllabus can be enriched. And then I'm going to talk about my most recent thing, which I think is the future of the Rich Syllabus, which is the syllabus that replaces the Casebook. I think the Casebook is passé. I think its time is done. That's partly what the E. Langdell project at CALI is about, although I'm a member of the board at CALI, by the way. So I'm familiar with how the E. Langdell project is going, and it sort of isn't going as quickly as it might. So I'll talk a little bit about my own efforts in that direction, which are very simpatico with the E. Langdell effort, which is still using the Casebook metaphor, and I think we even need to get rid of that. But I'll talk about that when I get there. So this is the. I'm embarrassed to say that this is my Spring 1998 Property 2 syllabus. It was online, right? It's in HTML, which is something. I mean, you can tell it's in HTML because I've got a little table up at the top, as you can see. I apologize for the wobbly stuff. There's nothing I can do about that. You can see there's a table up top, which I sort of vaguely remember myself being really pleased with myself that I came up with a table to sort of reproduce the look of a piece of paper, right? Because in HTML, of course, you need to do a table in order to put the data in it. I remember being sort of pleased with myself for doing that, but at least it's not PDF, which is almost literally tacking a piece of paper onto the internet, right? I mean, if PDF is just tacking a piece of paper onto the internet. this isn't much better than that, though, right? It's HTML, but it's essentially just tacking a piece of paper onto the internet. And if you've been around for a long time, you recognize this, right? You all did this, and you recognize it as the WordPerfect default look of an HTML page, right? That default gray background, which WordPerfect always put at the background of HTML pages. Now, of course, I had hoped by putting things online like this that I was saving trees, but I realized, I asked my students, so how many of you printed out the syllabus? All the hands go up, and I say, well, I guess I didn't save any trees. I merely redistributed the means of their destruction. Interestingly, the enriched syllabus is one which students tend not to print out because there's so much stuff in it. So all they get is the stuff at the top. So let me show you my syllabus from last, that's the course homepage. Let me show my syllabus from the last offering of Property 1 in fall 2007. There are some things to note about this in terms of it's not being your average syllabus, for one thing. My notes, that there are notes to students, and those notes are searchable, which is sort of an interest. So for those of you, actually let me just get a feel for who you are. How many are faculty? A good number of you. How many librarians? I should clarify that because librarians often teach. So how many of you teach courses for which there are syllabi? Right, that's not just faculty, that's some librarians as well. And how many of you are IT support folks? Okay, good. I was hoping to see some IT folks here because, as I say, there's the professor on the one side and there's the tech support guy on the other side. And most teachers can't do this without tech support. So if you went to law school, then I'll search for something that will bring back memories. I'll search for perpetuities. And that pulls up the things in the syllabus relevant to the rule against perpetuities, which you all remember fondly, I know, and I'll show you a bit more about that when we get there on the syllabus. Let me just bring up this, by the way, is the fall 2007 syllabus. I've got this note up at the top that the fall 2008 syllabus will be similar because I know there are some prospective students who, even though this is hidden, but it's obscure security. I mean, that is, it's not sort of out there ready for, but I know some students will find it. Some prospective students will find it, so I'm just telling them, hold your horses. So let me just show you the first one. The first thing to say about this is that every class on this syllabus has a web page, which means in a 14-week semester, 2 classes a week, that's 29 web pages. Well, that sounds like a heck of a thing to maintain. Well, it isn't really, because I don't actually create 29 web pages. There's the syllabus itself, on which I'll just briefly return to the syllabus itself. There's the syllabus itself, where every entry on the syllabus is generated by template. That is, there's content in the background, and the way the thing appears on the page is governed by a template. And I'll say a little bit about the template, and I hope I'm not putting on the tech guy hat here, because I'm trying to keep it not too technical. So I'll say a little bit about the template that delivers the content. The point of that is that I'm not creating a web page for every class. All I've done is created one template, and I've created content for every class. But the content for every class is not that big a deal. That is, it's not that big a deal to maintain that. It's no bigger a deal than keeping track of class notes for every class. So it's not a big deal to keep track of that content. In fact, as you'll see later in some of my classes, I actually use this to keep my class notes. Now, the underlying template does a number of things. One thing that the underlying template does is it controls for who has access. We're in a password-protected environment, and the password protection is fairly granular in the sense that there is some content that doesn't get delivered to students. It gets delivered only to me, and that's an example, those administrative things to edit, change the dates, or upload a file to the site. Those are things that only I see because we're in a password-protected environment. The browser knows who I am and delivers that content only to me. This is from the first class of last semester, the August 20th, fall semester rather, 2007. My recorder failed. I usually record my classes and then upload the content as a podcast, and it is a podcast, and I'll explain that in a moment too. So what the students see is the abstract summary stuff. Again, the template can test for who's retrieving the information, and so control access to the information that way. It can also test for time. So this post-class note doesn't show up. The test in the template says, is it past 2:30 on the date of the class? The class runs from 1:15 to 2:30. If it's not past 2:30, that content doesn't show up. So that's a way of giving students content that I want them to, that I prefer for them to see after the class and not before the class. Now, I'm not deluded. I know that students from last year are printing this stuff out and giving it to students from this year. So I know that some of my first-year students already have some of this information. Although when I asked my class at this class, how many of you printed out the syllabus, in a class of 72 people, only about 5 hands went up. And because I think that, I mean, they're used to dealing with information online rather than printing it out. And again, because there's all this depth to the syllabus, if they print out the syllabus, all they get is the page assignments. They don't get this content that's behind it. So the syllabus can test who's accessing the information, can test for what time it is. Teaching notes, I'll just make an observation about teaching notes are available only to me. That is, they're part of the content, but it's only delivered to me. That's an observation that I make there about the first case we start with, which is a case involving this is first year property, a case involving transfer of title from an Indian tribe, and the court had to deal with whether an Indian tribe could transfer good title, and the court said no, it couldn't. So I linked to things like Far Side cartoons, which you can't see because it's too small. It shows the caption is New York, 1626, chief of the Manhattan Indians addresses his tribe for the last time. He's holding up the beads which he accepted in exchange for Manhattan and saying, to begin, I'd like to show you this, isn't it a beaut? That was the last time he addressed his tribe. So that's just illustrative of the kinds of things that the template controls. I think I'll close this one out and pick it up further down well, actually, there's one class in which we do some economic analysis. I think economic analysis is quite useful in courses like property law. I'm skeptical of it in other contexts. But we have this, I wanted to show you what I record the class. I'm not going to play you a podcast because it pulls up MPlayer and does all this weird stuff on my Linux machine, so I'm not going to do that. But I record the class, and I'm also we have smartboards in all of the classrooms. So before class, I prepare sort of things in anticipation of the class on the smartboard. Then in class, I pull up the smartboard and scribble all over it during the class. One of the things, by the way, and if you don't have that technology, one of the things I really like about that technology is that I don't have to turn my back on the students anymore in order to write stuff on the board. I'm looking at them the whole time I'm doing it. I'm not turning around writing on a board. So at the end of class, I upload the podcast and I upload the whiteboard. And one of the things that the template checks for is the existence of the file. That is, I don't go in and create a link every time for the podcast and the whiteboard. So it tests for who's accessing, it tests for what time it is sometimes, and it tests for the existence of content, so that it won't even put the link up to the podcast unless the file is up there. And it won't put a link up to the whiteboard unless the file is up there. So let me just quickly show you what the whiteboard looks like. After class, once I get back into my office, I save the whiteboard to a PDF file and upload it to the server. And the stuff that's written and the nice straight lines is stuff that I prepare ahead of class, and the stuff after the stuff that's obviously squiggled on is what happens in class. One of the things that I just wanted to point out something about using Smartboard rather than something like PowerPoint. One of the themes of this class is the tragedy of the commons. You start out with a forest of 1,000 trees owned by 100 people. One of the things I can do in the smartboard, I can't do it on the PDF file obviously, but one of the things I can do on the smartboard is click on one of these trees and drag it out of the forest. I don't think you can do that in PowerPoint. I'm not aware of you being able to move stuff around on a PowerPoint slide. Maybe you can. I don't use the thing, but it's anyway. It's a nice way of sort of animating stuff. So anyway, then I upload the whiteboard at the end of class. I won't bore you with any more of the content of the whiteboard. It's probably controversial. And then again, teaching notes, of course, which are accessible only to me. Another feature of there being a web page for every class is the thing is navigable. One of the things I want to say about this course is when you compare this with the syllabus of spring of '98, there's obviously been a considerable evolution from that piece of paper tacked up to the internet to this stuff with links and stuff. This did not happen overnight. This evolved over time. And the evolution is transformative, but that is from the spring of '98 to this, you've got a transformation, but it didn't just happen. I think I probably first put this online in '97. No, later than that, obviously. I was doing stuff with my law and the internet class by then using this technology, but I hadn't transferred it to my other classes yet. So it was probably not until '99 or 2000 that I put it online for my other classes. And then the content grew over time. Obviously, I didn't just dump it all in at once. I would see things. And the delivery grew over time as well. At one point, I had no links enabling navigation from one class to the next. A student would just go to the syllabus. I imagine students going to the syllabus and pulling up today's class, just to see what the notes were about today's class. I hadn't assumed that once they did that, they'd then want to navigate from class to class without returning to the syllabus. But I found that I wanted to do that, and so there was an evolution in the delivery, so that now you can navigate from class to class just by doing this, which I'm going to take you up. Well, let me briefly start. Some of the things that enrich the syllabus. Again, some stuff ahead of class in the abstract summary of the class, in which I suggest things to students that they should be thinking about. Some, again, post-class notes. I also, adverse possession is the first place where I link to CALI lessons. I link to CALI lessons throughout Property 1 and Property 2, all the relevant CALI lessons that there are. I don't require students to do them, and I don't keep track of their use of them, but I do supply them, and they do use them and find them useful. I also link to outside stuff. For example, there's a case involving a dispute, an adverse possession dispute. One of the things I tell my students is that property law is about happy families and friendly neighbours, as it is. And the Lutz case is a case about friendly neighbours who get into this really nasty dispute about who owns a piece of property. And so Google Earth is just a wonderful resource, especially for a course like property or land use, because it's. I decided I'd go and see, okay, what does the Lutz property look like now? And interesting, this is the Lutz property, this undeveloped property in the middle. It's been some 100 years since the litigation, and still there's nothing there. I have no idea why not, but still there's hardly anything to be seen in that property. So that's another thing. I mean, again, notice, first of all, putting up that syllabus in HTML, big deal, and then realizing, well, wait a minute, it's HTML, it's hypertext markup language. We're in a hypertext environment. I ought to be taking advantage of the fact that there's stuff out there to which I could be linking. So I took a snapshot of the Lutz property on Google Earth and uploaded that to the course website. I'm going to go past this and into your favourite, those of you who went to law school, your favourite subject, of course, is estates and land in future interests. Well, those of you who had a decent property course anyway. I suppose there might be some of you who were not exposed to it in your first year property course. Again, links to CALI lessons. I want to move. I will often ask questions in class and invite students to come back to the syllabus after class. I want to get students into the habit of actually using the stuff that's there, and I don't actually track their use of it, but I want to get them into the habit. So on the syllabus itself, for example, if there's a single dagger there, that means that there's a post-class note to be seen after class. So that I hope that takes them back to it, and the double dagger tells them that there's links to CALI lessons. And occasional fun stuff like a link to life expectancy calculators on Google. The top one at the moment of which is live for 100 years and ask you a whole bunch of questions about because we're talking in here about valuing a life estate, and one of the questions relevant to that, of course, is what's the life expectancy? But I just want to go to the first one on the rule against perpetuities, just because it's something students need more help with, and the rule against perpetuities is one of those things. And so here I have an explication of the rule against perpetuities, which I hope that they look at before class, and then when we get into class, I go over this explication all over again. Then I have some post-class notes which restate the rule far less elegantly than John Chipman Gray stated it, but in a way that's perhaps more intelligible to them afterward. Then I have a teaching note to myself to remember to do a particular problem that always gives them trouble, and actually on this occasion I ended up doing it in the next class. So there the post-class note gives them in writing in more detail the answer to a problem that I had worked through in class. So that's the Property 1 syllabus. Enriched in some ways by, just pretty much by linking to additional information, by giving them information ahead of time, by giving them post-class notes, links to the podcast and the whiteboards. I'm going to briefly show you the Property 2. You may have noticed on the Property 1 one, but up in the corner there is the symbol for an RSS feed. There is an RSS. My syllabus has an RSS feed. How cool is that? To which students may subscribe, and this is essentially what they get is the podcast and the whiteboards that they can download to their RSS reader, so they don't have to be in a. I mean, it's not cool to have a syllabus with an RSS feed if nothing's changing, right? But what's changing here is that after every class, the podcast and the whiteboard gets uploaded. And there's supposed to be the formal standard for RSS feeds says that there's a maximum of 15 items, but I've got the whole semester there, and there doesn't seem to be any problem with putting the whole semester. Oops, sorry about that. Putting the whole semester up there. So any questions about where I am so far? Because I'm going to take a sort of a slight detour towards the law and the internet, and which is slightly different, and then come back to the con law. Yeah.
I was wondering if your students use their laptops in your classroom, because it seems like there's no need.
They do use their laptops in the classroom, but I often tell them if I see somebody suddenly, looking as if they're transcribing stuff, I tell them, you really don't need to be transcribing. You really need to be paying attention, because everything you need is online after the fact. Not only is the podcast there, so you can listen to it again if you think you might have missed something, but the whiteboards are up there as well. So I think I had one student respond to me. He said, I think he said, but I'm a tactile learner, so I need to be doing this. So I said, well, okay, if you really are a tactile learner, he was one of our more difficult students. If you really are a tactile learner, okay. I remember in the very first class where I'm teaching that case about the whether transfer of title from an Indian chief is good title, and I was trying to explain what Chief Justice John Marshall had said about it, and he just blurted out, "That's not law," which of course gave me a teaching opportunity. So, any other questions about it so far? Yeah.
Would you consider doing away with the textbook entirely?
I am going to do that. That's exactly what I'm going to be talking about when I get to Con Law 1. In other words, the next step in the evolution is to eliminate the casebook entirely, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Because as you see, when you look at this, it's a pretty conventional syllabus, right? I mean, it's got some extra stuff, but it's a pretty conventional syllabus in the sense that you've got. I mean, I know some people don't put dates on their syllabi, but I like to put dates on my syllabus, and students seem to like to know that on January 28th they're going to be doing what I tell them we're going to be doing. So I give dates and topic and page numbers, and that's just a conventional syllabus on the face of it. So you're right. The next step is But I'm just going to take a brief detour to my Law on the Internet course. This is not so much a syllabus as a schedule, and I say that because although it's obvious, there's a look and feel here, right? You can see this is a sort of green on brown theme because it's dirt law, right? This is nobody, thankfully, calls it the information superhighway anymore, but I was sort of going for grey on grey, sort of, tarmac colours. Although I actually kind of like the way it looks without that. But anyway, you can see the sort of thematic similarity between these websites. And of course that's because there's a style sheet. Which, of course, law professors don't know about style sheets. Only technical folks know about style sheets. So this is actually this course. I wanted to say a little bit about this course, just because it's so different from the more conventional course. It's a constructivist course in the sense that the students provide all of the content. I just provide the context in which the content is discussed. They decide what they want to talk about. It happened that because this is a summer school class and so we're doing in 7 weeks what we ordinarily do in 14, I couldn't get anyone to volunteer to do the first topic, so I did the first topic. But other than that, the students are entirely responsible for what we talk about. They form into groups, and then they and you can see we have one discussion starts on Friday at 6 and lasts till the next Friday at 6. That's why I say it's going on even as we speak, because it's an asynchronous discussion. And then another discussion starts on Tuesday and goes to the next Tuesday. So as you see from the schedule, again, because the template is time conscious, the schedule tells you that one is concluding today, another is in progress, that's the Tuesday to Tuesday one, and the next one will begin at 6 p.m. today, as you see from the... I'll just show the content here is not content that I supply, it's content that the students supply. So we have forums in which the students provide the content on the right, and then they can either contribute by email or post to the discussion. I just put this one up last night because they only just got it to me in the Internet defamation. And on the right you'll see Patrick Wiseman's legal prowess is often extolled, but it's smoke and mirrors, if I can be so bold. The chap who's often compared to Plato can't even correctly pronounce tomato. His law school exams are unreasonably hard. He writes them as though he thinks he's the bard, and his motive for making his tests such a chore, he's still pissed that the Brits lost the war. That either shows that they have no respect for me or that they have a whole lot of respect for me, and I'm not sure which. Anyway, again, one of the things I tell the students about this class in particular is I won't teach you anything, but you'll learn a whole lot because it's a completely constructivist course. And what's interesting is that when you get to the end of this class and look at the content that has been generated, between they also write papers at the end that get posted to the web on a topic of their choice. But you see the forums, the forum content, the discussion in the forum, and the final papers. They generate a whole lot of very interesting content in this course over the course of the semester. So it's the same basic. They even well, I won't show you, but the students, by selecting a link for a particular date, get to claim a date and put in their topic and put in who's going to be responsible for it. Now, this next one, I think, is this is a syllabus in transition. It says it's and of course the theme here, it being constitutional law, is the red, white, and blue theme, right? This is a syllabus in transition, which is why, although it says it's the fall 2008 syllabus, the classes from fall 2007 are still there because I'm still working on getting from last fall to this fall. And what I've told my students, this is a required course, and so I'm a bit apprehensive about this. It's a required course, and I've told my students that we're making a transition from a text-based course to an all-online course, and that they are the students who are making that transition. Evolution is transformative, but every now and then the environment forces you to adapt. And the environment forced me to adapt. The Casebook, in its 16th edition, this is, those of you who are familiar with Con Law Casebooks are familiar with Gunter on Con Law. It's now Sullivan and Gunter is no longer with us, so it's really just Sullivan. And in the 16th edition of the Casebook, she has so gutted the cases, I'm afraid to say, that I used the Casebook all of last year and was constantly finding myself telling my students, well, had you had the earlier edition of the Casebook or read the full edition of the case, full version of the case, you would have seen this, that, and this. And she's completely eviscerated the cases. So the Casebook has become useless to me, and so I was sort of moved partly by the whole E. Langdell notion of open sourcing casebooks anyway. I had been moved to maybe do something online with this material, and she just pushed me over the edge. So I've told my students, do not buy a new edition of the Casebook because it won't have any retail value after Con Law 2 is over, because by then I will have made the transition to all online, and my colleagues aren't doing the same thing, but they are all abandoning that Casebook for another Casebook. But I decided, okay, here's the opportunity to get rid of the Casebook. Why do we need Casebooks anymore? I had hoped that maybe there would be more progress with E. Langdell, because part of my problem here is getting to the materials. So let me show you what I'm up to here. Public.resource.org recently released an enormous database of Supreme Court opinions and federal court opinions as well, but being a common law teacher, I'm a snob, but I don't care what other courts have to say, I only care about the Supreme Court, which is a good thing, because now just about every Supreme Court opinion from Volume 1 is accessible somewhere online for free. That is, you don't have to rely on proprietary people like Westlaw and Lexis to get hold of this stuff. Publicresource.org, you just go to publicresource.org and you'll see a link to cases, and I have actually downloaded their whole database of cases onto my laptop, and I have it on my server sitting in my office. And my technical guy, my IT guy, wrote a little script for me that sits inside the template, so that when I put in a case citation in the template, as long as I follow his instructions about putting it in within the right span, whenever I put a case in the template, there's a little script in there which which looks it up in the public.resource.org, actually looks it up on my server, and if it's there, it links to it. Now, the next step, of course, is not just linking to it, but editing the cases, because I do not want to have my students read everything in full text. Some of it I do. Some important cases, and this might be one of them, Marbury against Madison. Some of the cases, I want them to read the whole thing. Marbury against Madison is a good one just because it illustrates the brilliance of Chief Justice John Marshall's approach to constitutional interpretation. We could argue about that, but we won't. Where there aren't, occasionally I found that I've, followed my tech guy's instructions about how to link the case, and no link shows up, and it turns out that there are some gaps in the publicresource.org database. Usually those cases are findable somewhere else, and often sometimes anyway, there's a substitute for those cases. This is, as I said a moment ago, the students have access to the notes, questions, links. I actually keep, and I've been doing this in constitutional law for several years now, my class notes are actually in this syllabus. They're just not accessible to students. They're accessible only to me. I do sometimes release them to students after the class, but I have done that on occasion. I'm not going to do that this time. Of course, these notes are notes taken when I was using the Casebook, and so I'm going to have to update the notes. That's why I say the thing evolves over time, especially in terms of the content. I know some people change Casebooks annually just to keep themselves fresh. I find that I don't need to do that. I think I stay fairly fresh even without, which means that if you compare the 98 property syllabus with the property 2 syllabus with the spring 2008 property 2 syllabus, they look rather similar because I'm still using the same Casebook. It's 3 editions later, but the coverage is pretty similar, so they look much the same. Which means that as I add content from year to year, that content survives from year to year. I don't have to recreate that content every time I offer the course, which is why the content obviously evolves and grows over time. One of the things, as I say, one of the things that I'm going to have to think about is editing the cases. What I had hoped to do is edit the cases in a way that would be useful to others. That was partly what the idea of eLangdell was, that you'd edit a case and put it up in the eLangdell repository, and others could use it if they wanted to use it, which strikes me as a good idea. But at the moment, there's nowhere to put it, and there's no guidance about what format one should use in order to, make it usable to others. But as long as my tech guy tells me that as long as we all use good XML, we'll be in good shape. So, some of the cases are not yet available because some of them are just too recent. So they're not available in the public.resource.org. It's a complete coincidence, as I say at the top of this, that on Thursday, September 11th, 2008, I will be discussing the Gitmo cases. I didn't do that on purpose. What I did do on purpose was move the separation of powers stuff earlier in the semester because it's the stuff that's sort of more grabbing people's attention. So I did that deliberately, but I didn't realize that by doing that I'd end up with the Gitmo cases on September 11th. But it's a sort of nice coincidence that I did. Now, some of these cases, of course, are not yet the Razul against Bush, which is a statutory habeas corpus case, is in that database. But of course, the more recent ones are not. They're like the most recent one is available at LII, but not in. So I have to figure out a way when it comes to editing these cases. I have to figure out a way how to deal with all these different formats and how to sort of put it in the syllabus in a way that is relatively uniform. Because although I want to get rid of the Casebook, I want students to sort of have a sort of uniform look and feel as they're going through the material. I don't want them to be suddenly looking at the styling that you've seen a moment ago was the public.resource.org styling, and this obviously is the LII styling, and I want to make it somehow uniform. But eventually, as I say, I think the future of the enriched syllabus is making the Casebook irrelevant. The next session in this room after lunch is folks talking about the future of the Casebook, and it's John Mayer and Jean Wu talking about the future of the Casebook. And I've been trying to tell John that we need to drop the metaphor of the Casebook. We need to forget about the Casebook. There was a conference held at Georgia State last spring on the future of legal education. And there was a fellow there who presented this very nice online thing, but it was an online Casebook, even to the point of printing everything out and making it possible to put everything in PDF and in other words, making it look like a book. I'm sick of the book. I don't want it to look like a book anymore. I don't think it's useful to make it look like a book anymore. I think a rich syllabus with links to relevant materials and making it clear to students that I want you to read this and I want you to read this. For example, I have this right here, the Joint Resolution for the Authorization for Use of Military Force, is nowhere in the Casebook, it seems to me, it ought to be. That is, students ought to read that so they can figure out what the argument is about what did Congress authorize the president to do, and that kind of thing. So I can link to all these things without sort of being tied to the notion of a book. It's not a book anymore. One of the things that's also going to be transformative about the way I present this material, at least, is I have told my students in constitutional law for years now that constitutional law, the course at least, is about making constitutional arguments. And I've done, in terms of presenting the making constitutional arguments to them, I've done some of that, but mostly we've done what most constitutional law teachers do. We have them read cases and discuss the reasoning in the cases and the dissents and so forth, but not so much actually talk about making constitutional arguments. So I'm going to be, one of the things that I did last year with Con Law 1 was link to the oyes.org materials for all the recent, for as many cases as they had information. One of the things they have there is recordings of oral arguments. So I'm going to assign listen to some oral arguments, and I'm going to assign some of those and have students listen to oral arguments and critique them. They also have, particularly in recent cases, they have briefs as well. So I'm going to have students read briefs, see how an advocate in the Supreme Court makes out a case, see what constitutional argument, see and hear what constitutional argument sounds like and looks like. And I think that too will enrich, it enriches the syllabus. I think it will enrich the experience of constitutional law. As I say, I'm still a bit apprehensive about doing this in this course because this course is a required course. I haven't sort of mentioned to my dean that I'm doing this. He's an old friend. He probably trusts me to do it all right. But I haven't actually. I did very early on send an email out to all the students registered for the class telling them that they were going to be in this transitional class, and I haven't had a whole bunch of students drop. So I guess it's going to work. Then one thing that's different here, these check marks all indicate that there is online material to be read. I didn't realize when I first started doing this that I was going to have online material to be read for just about every class, so I thought I'd put a check mark by it, but it turns out it's checked everywhere, so I'll probably take that out of the picture. And I also refer them to the pages that in the most recent edition of the Casebook, but assign the online material first, and if I haven't assigned online material, then use the Casebook, but otherwise use the online material. So it may be that the Casebook will become redundant rather more quickly than I had expected, but no more quickly than I had hoped. So, any more questions about that? Or any discussion or thoughts, or have I lost my mind? I think this generation of students will very likely read them online.
Do you try, with the Supreme Court cases being available in multiple formats online, do you try and look for one that's better quality, or just try to stay consistent? I will be transforming it myself. Okay. That is, most of it's all of the stuff that's available is pretty much in good quality XML. So all I have to do is play with it a bit. Or all my tech guy has to do is play with it a bit. The guy with the hat. Yeah.
I have a follow-up to this first question. Do you have printing limits at your law school?
I'm pretty sure that we don't if our students pay for printing.
Right, but your students do have to pay for printing.
Yes.
So have you gotten any feedback on any of your online courses about, even though you don't require them to print it out in any way, shape, or form?
In fact, I'd prefer that they not.
Are you getting complaints from them that I want it in paper and it's causing?
No, never. But I haven't had so much material online before, so it could happen in this class. Because if all the material's online, I suppose I could start getting complaints. But I really do think this generation is pretty comfortable reading online.
You say you prefer your students not to do that.
Right.
If they're going to be doing depth, aren't they going to be underlining things and highlighting? Do they do that online in some form? In class, you refer to certain passages, hard to do without a uniform date number, etc.
Well, when it comes, yeah, I mean, when it comes to cases, that is an issue. So they may very well want to print out cases for exactly this, to write marginal notes and so forth. And my technical guy might think of a way of having them do that online, but he hasn't done that yet. In terms of, what was your second follow-up?
Sometimes in class, I want to point to a particular passage, and it's easy to say.
Right. The public.resource.org are all numbered paragraphs. So, and I will make sure that I do the same thing in whatever format it has. I'll have numbered paragraphs. Yes, I mean, actually, I give always open book exams, and the issue with putting all my materials online, I think what I'm going to, at the moment we use Secure Exam, which of course cuts them off from access to their material on their laptops. I think I'm going to have to say you don't have to use Secure Exam, use Word, because you need to have, since it's an open book exam, you ought to be able to have access to all the online material. At which point, of course, there'll be lots of cutting and pasting going on, so I'll probably have to impose word limits and things like that.
Is this template available?
Not really. This is software. When I first started, tech guy. When I first started developing this software, things like Blackboard and none of that was out there. So I developed my own content course management stuff, and it's evolved with me in ways. That was why I tried to stay relatively non-technical in my description of the of the thing, because I now given now the kinds of content management software that's out there, it should be possible to. And much of it is template driven. That is, an underlying database and a template that determines how the data gets delivered. So I would think, I don't know about Drupal, for example, but I would think that most content management systems can do what mine did. That is, test for who's online. That is, who's accessing the information. Test for whether the content is actually out there on the server. Even do I think maybe the timing tests. They're not as easy as they sound, so maybe that might be trickier. But the other stuff is pretty straightforward, I would think. Paul?
Two comments. First of all, one on our experience in the Glasgow Graduate School of Law and the printing issue, which we thought would be a big issue for us, because we have almost no lectures. We have just either webcasts or podcasts and student content. Actually, the transcription doesn't take up all that much because printed pages, because the transcription of the video stream or the audio stream is so compact, as it were. And we found also that certainly as far as printing out cases, because all the cases are online for a particular course and the statutes as well, via Bailey or Westlaw, or Bailey, British and Irish Legal Information Institute. And we found that the students would really only print out what they felt were not only the leading cases, but the bits in the leading cases that they needed, rather than printing out whole reams of the stuff. Because there's vast areas, there's vast acres of casebooks that the students just don't look at, even though they have that. So there's a kind of wasted paper there as well.
Right.
So you're actually forcing students to kind of focus in on what they really, really think they need for the assessment, whatever that assessment happens.
And especially if you give them an economic incentive, right? If it costs them to print, they'll be more careful about what they print.
That's right. And
Right.
the second point was that I love your idea, Patrick, of getting students to form their own constitutional argument. I think that's truly constructivist thinking, as it were. I think there's 2 points there. I think someone called Cynthia Baker in Indiana has been doing work on that. She's doing just forming constitutions, as it were, based on, for example, early Indiana constitutional documentation. and kind of looking at how that might be applied to almost like a kind of virtual land, as it were.
Right.
And it's quite
That's interesting, because I've thought years ago, and I didn't know quite how to implement it, of putting students in a MUD, multi-user dimension, with randomly assigned wealth, land, randomly assigned skills, and just see what happens. I mean, see if they'd come up with rules and an exchange, and just see what would happen.
And that's precisely what happens on certain islands in Second Life, where people are
Right.
rehearsing these constitutional arguments.
My notion being that they probably wouldn't come up with a rule against perpetuities, but they'd come up with something that served the same purpose. They would do that. That is, they would come up with something that prevented dead-hand control for generations.
I like the way you put your classes together, much better than Twin. Are you familiar with Twin?
It didn't exist when I started doing this, but yes, I am. Yeah.
I mean, we've been encouraging our faculty to use Twin just because, first of all, the students are familiar with it, and students are also not necessarily eager to use technology. And for the faculty who don't want to, who don't really like to do the technological stuff, it's very easy for us to set up the course pages. But I would, if you're interested in commercializing it, I mean, helping to develop something that would be beyond your classroom. Do you go beyond your classroom? Is anybody else interested in
Actually, for a while, there were several faculty who were using bits and pieces of it, especially the online forums people were using. Because each of my classes actually has an online forum that looks like the Law on the Internet forum, except it's just one for the entire class, whereas the Law on the Internet is one for every topic. So faculty have done that. Nobody ever took me up. You have the experience. I mean, in my experience as being a techie, which I'm not really, but I developed a bunch of stuff early on, and I know that that tech people have this experience too. You tell faculty, I've got this really neat thing that I can do this, that, and the other with, and some say, well, that's cool. And then months later, they ask, is there any way we can do this, that, and the other? And I say, I told you how we could do this, that, and the other about 6 months ago. Where were you? So I've offered my syllabus thing to people, for example, because I think it would be a useful thing for faculty to use, put an online syllabus to which they could add content if they wanted. And I've had no takers.
it would be more of a push from the IT people and the dean to say, let's put together a whole, all of our courses.
Well, my instructional technologist is sitting at the back of the room, so she'll
It's a lot of work.
and she likes this too. So.
I don't care for using Twin because it's proprietary and just things about it. That's sort of what we do.
And one of the things about this, by the way, is that because the password protection is relatively granular, the syllabus itself is available to everybody. So anybody can come and look at the syllabus, but only members of the class can then get the information, the per class webpage.
I have a suggestion for vertically related cases until such time as you might know it's ready for problem. One of the sister sites of Wikipedia is a very small outfit called Wikibooks that allows for the creation of original content, including edited a version, creates text, and creates a published elsewhere. And because it's a wiki, they've got nice formatting. Their style sheets are pretty good.
Wikibooks.
Wikibooks is
Oh, thank you. I'll give that some thought.
Expanding more, just to start off, I'm kind of going in kind of one of these directions, and one of the things that I haven't really talked to many people in my university about, going in this kind of direction, is just because of mainly kind of the faculty's kind of vision of, well, this is the way I've already always done my resume. I've always written a resume. I've never built a resume. And I have a couple ideas as far as using Drupal and using that in order to perform kind of content. So it's kind of easy for the faculty members to build this kind of content. But at the same time, there's kind of holdup of the old school faculty members not wanting to move to the new system and feeling kind of it's almost like the political side of the issue, where trying to move ahead with the technology, but like not trying to scare them too much into.
Well, you have to persuade faculty that there's some value to doing it. And I think one of the things that I think is persuasive that there's value to doing this is that the content persists. That is, you don't have to do it all at once. You can do a little bit at the beginning, which students will probably find useful. And as you develop the content persists and grows and becomes more use. I mean, so the faculty member is actually building something of use. Now, it does require some maintenance course. I mean, if you're linking to stuff, I've got some stuff up here, for example, on my property syllabus linked, where the links are at the moment broken, and I'm going to have to go figure out why they're broken. And, but I think if only we had more money to hire more support staff. I mean, if we had, because at the moment that we've got technology, we've got so much technology that what the support staff are able to support, if everybody started using all the technology, we'd be breaking their backs. Anyone else? Yeah.
Usability question. On many web browsers, it's very difficult to highlight the comments. Do you find that your students are taking the material and importing it into something like OneNote or Word and using that to actually read it on?
They might very well be doing that, and still not printing it out, but importing the text into something else. One thing that I've thought about doing with my individual web page per class is providing an opportunity for students to annotate it right there in the thing, and either saying, oh, this annotation is a public one or a private one. Since I can control by who has access, they could post a note just for themselves. I will tell them that I can see all the notes, just so that they know that no note is private from me, but they can keep notes private from others, and so they could actually annotate in the page itself.
As a follow-up to that, though, would you find yourself spending more time addressing what they annotated to themselves, saying something like responding and saying, I've noticed your annotation and I think you've missed X, Y, or Z, go back and read, as an opportunity to give them more feedback?
There's that possibility, yeah. And at the moment, discussions like that take place in the forum, and I monitor the forum all the time and do correct things that are said wrong in the forum. But you're right. If I give myself a whole other thing to monitor, that is every page for every class, yeah, that might be a bit of a pain. So maybe I'll just rethink that. Of course, I'm not correcting their notes elsewhere, right? I mean, so I can tell them, you're on your own. Guess that's time. Thank you.